Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Behind the Mic here on ASTV Productions. I'm Jonathan Hodgson, back with you once again, and we have another exciting show lined up for you this week, and we can't wait to dive into it. Tonight, we'll be joined by Kelcey Brade. Kelcey has been a contributor for a long time to TSN, including SportsCentre, and first debuted behind the SportsCentre desk in 2014, and as well has hosted TSN's coverage of Major League Soccer. Tonight, we'll dive into the role that the Vancouver sports market has played in Kelcey's career from his early days covering the teams out there, the Canucks, the Whitecaps, the Lions, and a little bit about his academic career at Trinity Western and BCIT, as well as being an instrumental part in the early days of Trinity's athletics broadcasts. And before we take our first break, we'll remind you that you can follow ASTV on all of our social media pages, including YouTube and Facebook. That's where you'll find all our live broadcasts of Behind the Mic and all of our other shows. And of course, you can find our online home at astvproductions.com. So we'll be back on the other side of a quick break, and we'll talk with Kelcey. We'll get into SportsCentre, his love of soccer, wisdom gathered along the way, and the message that he sends to other aspiring sportscasters. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be right back here on Behind the Mic. And back here on Behind the Mic on ASTV, joined now by our guest for this week, Kelcey Brade from TSN. Kelcey, thanks so much for coming on with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was neat to speak to a large group of students in the Vancouver area recently online, and the fact that it's led to more opportunities where I get to talk about amateur sports, professional sports, and all that is definitely a bonus. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, and that's where you and I first met in that group setting in Brian Weeb's sportscasting course at BCIT. Is that something that you do often, speaking to student broadcasters?
It is something, obviously with COVID and whatnot, that kind of disappeared for the last year and a bit. So Brian was actually the first one to reach out since we got back into more, I guess I wouldn't even say normalcy, but the fact that things are starting to open up, sports are starting to be played. I think everything's kind of trending back in that direction. So in the past, it was probably one or two classes a year, but it was in being physically in that classroom. So that's kind of the beauty of Zoom and all these other online things that you can do now. The fact that you can be part of classes from across the country or around the world. So it was cool to be on Brian's class. I know we had talked several years back, I think, or so it was, about me maybe coming into a class, but just the timing wise, coming into BC, we have family out there still. That's where my wife's family's from. So just the timing didn't work out when we were vacationing and the school semesters lining up.
And that's been, you talk about being able to zoom in, and that's been one of the things that has been something positive that's emerged from this last year. Is, I guess, all of us have been forced to be more creative, and that has opened up some new opportunities like this show, being able to connect virtually, find ways to connect virtually with people that you might not otherwise have a chance to connect with.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And there's always that online fatigue or that Zoom fatigue that people kind of hit. But at the same time, like you mentioned, it forces people to be creative. It forces people who were maybe sometimes getting a little too comfortable in the way that things went, and force them to get into those uncomfortable situations, because that's really at the end of the day when people start to thrive, is you get out of that normalcy loop or that comfort loop that you're in, and you try and push yourself a little bit. So I'm sure talking in person is always a lot easier than trying to carry a conversation, whether it be over the phone, FaceTime, Zoom, ASTV. But that being said, that's the beauty of this right now, is the way that sports broadcasting and even sports in general is starting to trend, is the ability to do more stuff online and be able to have more of immediacy with the viewer or the fan. And that's the beauty of this right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about just doing what we can to, like I've talked about with athletes during this time, it's do what you can to be better on the other side of it.
Absolutely. And I have a son who's 11, my oldest one, and he plays rep hockey, rep soccer. And there could have been that opportunity for him to just take this last year, really from last March until what we're coming up on March now, off. But instead, they pushed themselves by doing Zoom training, and that was by doing workouts with his team via Zoom. Then in the summertime and fall, when things kind of reopened and case counts across the country kind of dipped, then they were able to meet back together, play modified games. And then for most of the country in December, everything went back into lockdown again. And only recently out here in Toronto have things started to slowly open, and the team's slowly getting back together. It's smaller group workouts right now, but that December to the middle of February portion, we were meeting online once a week for soccer, twice a week for hockey, and they were getting a chance to just see each other, have the human contact, because I think that's the toughest thing about this past year, and what most of us are craving is the fact that we want to be around people. That's kind of how we are by nature in so many different ways, or at least most of us are. I like to spend time at home by myself, watching TV or playing video games, but there's also a large percentage of me, that large part of me, that wants to get out there in the public and just be at the local hockey rink or the soccer field or whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we mentioned in the opening that we have a number of things that we're going to cover here today. And since we touched on it in our opening there, we'll start on the education note. You're an alumni of BCIT, and you're an alumni of Trinity Western. So take us back to young Kelcey getting into the education side, and I guess kind of the things that you picked up from each of the schools that you were at.
Yeah, and for me, I grew up in a small town in northern Alberta. It's a town called Mayerthorpe, a town of around 1,500 people, give or take. And for me, I grew up playing hockey and baseball. I played midget all the way up to midget AA. There was an opportunity for me to try out with the Drayton Valley Thunder of the Alberta Junior Hockey League. I tried out with them. They were interested, but keeping me more of as an AP, so like a affiliated player, a call-up, going into finishing up my last year of high school. But I kind of saw the writing on the wall that I was not going to be making it as a professional hockey player if I wasn't cracking a junior A squad in my final year of midget. So I jumped on the opportunity to go to Trinity Western out in Langley, British Columbia. I was part of their intercollegiate, is what they slowly became as a hockey team there. So that kind of is what drew me out there, just to have the fact to play competitive hockey again, or keep playing competitive hockey. And this year in 2020, 2021 was actually supposed to be the first year that they were part of U Sports Canada West playing men's hockey. So it's pretty cool to have been part of the grassroots project way back then, when they were really trying to ramp up the competitive stream there. So that was kind of the big lure for me going to TW, was the fact that I could get to continue playing hockey at a pretty competitive level. But the other one for me was I wanted to get into sports broadcasting. I've always wanted to do that ever since I was a kid. But I knew I needed the educational aspect of it. I took the communications program at TW, and also the business administration program. And that was really more so me just getting life experience, moving away from home at the age of 17, just going out on my own. I think if I had gone to BCIT right out of high school, or NAIT, which is the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, or stayed in the province and went down to SAIT, which is in Southern Alberta in Calgary, I don't think I would have had much success going there. I don't think I was ready for it. There was a lot of growth opportunity that I had at TWU. I improved so much on my writing. It's unbelievable, the writing aspect, how just poor I was with that coming out of high school and then into TWU. But by the end of my final year at TWU, I was close to a B average. And considering that I got a letter at the end of my first semester at TWU saying if I don't pull up my grades, I'm not going to be returning for my second year. So there was a lot of growth there as just a person, and also as a student, and someone who then had to realize the importance of, like, hey, if you're going to make this step, you're going to have to kind of own up and do a lot of the work and the heavy lifting yourself, as opposed to perhaps having other people come alongside me to help. So I did that. When I was in my end of my second year of TWU, I said goodbye to playing competitive hockey there. I guess two and a half years in is when I kind of said goodbye to playing competitive hockey, because there was an opportunity within the athletics department there that kind of opened up, and it was broadcasting athletic games, Spartans basketball, volleyball, soccer, you name it, eventually hockey, over internet radio back then. So me and my buddy, who's a doctor now, much smarter than I am and will ever be, he and I kind of put together a game plan to start broadcasting the Spartans games over what we called Spartan Web Radio back then. Once they moved to the Langley Event Center, with that option, or that like amazing opportunity, and that's been presented them by being able to play out of the Langley Event Center, and just the broadcast team that works there, and that being available to them, then we switched over to television, web TV broadcast. So we had the radio component and web TV component. So there I was calling anywhere from like 3 to 6 games a weekend, Friday or Saturday nights, across all different sports. And in the course of my time calling games for Spartan Web Radio, because once I graduated from TWU, I still came back every weekend to call games for them. I lost count, but it was nearing the 500 or over the 500 mark of games that I was able to do play-by-play for. And it was multiple different sports. But had I not gotten that education from TWU and that life experience from TWU, then that would not have set me up for the success and the ability for me to get into BCIT. It was a competitive program when I got in back in 2006. I remember I had to do the written exam to try and get into the program, and there were hundreds of people there. And it's insane, because by the time I graduated in 2008 was when there was the big economic recession, and that completely changed the game on broadcasting at so many different levels. The small shops across the country started to disappear. The overall interest, like hardcore interest in broadcasting, kind of disappeared in terms of just how many people were applying to be part of the program. But I needed those four and a half years at TWU to set me up to get those 2 years at BCIT to open up the doors to eventually working for CTV and now TSN.
And you talk about how busy you would be on a weekend covering multiple games across multiple sports, and you lump in your academics onto that. As you look back now, how important a learning experience was that for you as a sportscaster, getting your hands in not only so many different sports, but as you kind of alluded to, so many different roles within sportscasting? How important was that to get all those different experiences then?
It was, I can't even quantify how important it was for me. The fact that most times I was doing the play-by-play, but I was in a roundabout way the overall producer of Spartan Web Radio. So we had different broadcast teams calling the women's games, the men's games for women's basketball, men's basketball, volleyball, men's volleyball, soccer. So there were some games where I was the producer. I was the one pulling up working the soundboard, or eventually when we got to the television aspect of it, cutting between shots, between plays and everything like that, and rolling back the replay. So I was working more as a producer from the overall vision of it, also as a bit of a director. There was certain times when a student called in sick, so then I'd jump behind the camera and also work the camera for certain things. And then, of course, doing color commentary, doing the play-by-play. During the week in the lead up to the bigger games against their rivals, whether it be UBC or SFU, or playoff games, then we'd do a video preview leading up that week. So that would then be bringing everyone back, setting up the storylines that we would want to talk about, doing multiple takes, because none of us were professionals back then, and it took us a gazillion times to try and spit the words out right when we're trying to record something. When it's live, it's a completely different animal, because you just got to fly by the seat of your pants sometimes, or just ad lib and roll on with it. But when you're trying to have that tightly packaged 2.5 minute preview, then you're doing 100 takes trying to figure that out. But the experience at TWU led to BCIT. I think just getting my hands on the equipment of BCIT, where I added the video editing component to it, and the audio editing components, it made it that much easier and that much more simpler of a transition. I think more simple of a transition for me, the fact that I didn't have to worry about understanding all the equipment, because I had those 3 years of TWU where I had my hands on so many different pieces of equipment, just helping get that product there. So I think that set me up very well. And when it got to the writing aspect of it, so I had mentioned that TWU, my writing was just awful. It was not good whatsoever. But by 2006, and I forgot to share this with the BCIT class that I was able to speak to a while back, was that in 2006, myself and a couple other people started a website called bcsportsbeat.ca. And it was an outlet for amateur sports writers who want to just get the experience of writing a game recap, writing a game preview, writing a feature story. Just with the connections that I had built up through TWU and BCIT, I was able to get media access or media passes for my writers to Vancouver Canucks games, BC Lion games, Whitecaps games, what you name it. We were able to usually send a writer to that Vancouver Giants games and be able to cover those games, being able to interview players down on the ice or in the dressing rooms or in the locker rooms afterwards, or on the field at the end of a Whitecaps game. Just being able to get that experience before I got to BCIT, and others who eventually went to BCIT and onwards, just being able to get that experience and know that there was that sense of we were trying to carry ourselves as professionals, but also understanding like, hey, it's okay to make mistakes or ask the wrong question. But we were very conscious of the fact that we were the amateur guys in the room trying to gain the experience. So being able to make those connections with the professionals at the time, whether it be Dan Murphy back then or Farhan Lalji, so many different people who lent their hand to myself and other writers back then as part of BC Sports Beat was just huge to give us confidence going into the BCIT program. And which I had said, it just made, I think, the transition and just the 2-year experience at BCIT a lot easier. There were still the challenges, but it made it a lot more manageable.
Yeah, for sure. And just before we go to our first break here, I wanted to bring up one other thing. I believe it was in 2008. You spent some time doing news and sports in Whitecourt, and included in that role was you were on your outlets beat for the Edmonton Football Club and the Edmonton Oilers. What are some of your favorite memories from what was probably your first experience covering those teams?
Yeah, it was amazing because I grew up just outside of Edmonton. So I was able to go back home, work at a radio station about 30 minutes from my house in Marathon up in Whitecourt. News was the primary focus of that. And at the time there was a lot. There was talk about there potentially being like a nuclear power plant built in Whitecourt. There was unfortunately the RCMP murder case that involved officers and even a guy that I played beer league hockey with from my town of Marathon. So that took up a lot of the focus in the summertime that I had started there. But in the fall, then the opportunity came. We were part of New Cap Radio Group. So they owned 790 CFCW, which is one of the big radio stations in Edmonton, country music station. They used to have Oilers rights, so they always had a seat at the game. So I was able to connect with them and cover the Oilers and the Edmonton football team for the New Cap Radio Network in Northern Alberta. So getting to go to games, getting to meet Joey Moss for the first time. He recently passed away. He was the Oilers locker room guy and really just the heartbeat of the Oilers and even the Edmonton football team for all the work that he did for those teams. Getting to meet him for the first time was like was a pretty big honor for me. Other people who back then were more than kind to lend their hand was Christy Chorley. She used to cover them for the Score. She now is Christy Johnson. She ended up marrying one of the quarterbacks for the Edmonton football team back then, and they live now in the States. And she's won multiple awards, and her husband wins multiple awards for film and sports editing and sports autobiographies and sports biographies and stuff like that, and documentaries. So it was cool to make those connections back then and keep those connections now, and be able to look back at that and realize, like, yeah, that's just another stepping stone of where I was hoping to go. And it was an important stepping stone, like every single one has been so far.
Awesome. Well, we're going to take our first break here on Behind the Mic. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back on the other side with block number 2 with Kelcey Brade. Thanks for watching Behind the Mic on ASTV. And back here on Behind the Mic on ASTVProductions.com and on ASTV YouTube. Jonathan Hodgson joined by Kelcey Brade this week from TSN SportsCentre. We had a great time in our first segment talking about the early days, some of the education and some of the first jobs for Kelcey, breaking into sportscasting. And in segment number 2, I wanted to focus in a little bit more. We'll stay in Vancouver, but I wanted to focus in a little bit more on that sports scene that's been really important to you. And you are really ingrained in the Vancouver scene as well. They're covering basically all the teams through about 2014. And I guess we'll start with something you alluded to in the first segment, was talking about people like Farhan Lalji and Dan Murphy who were influential to you. Were there other personalities, other sportscasters in the Vancouver market that were important to you? Yeah,
the list could go on. First and foremost, just at CTV, Perry Solkowski, who is the sports director there. He now is one of the morning co-hosts on Sportsnet 650 on the radio there in Vancouver. He was my first ever boss in television, and getting to learn from him, his ability to tell stories, his ability to tell tale, like spin a story and have it be so creative and so relaxing at the same time. It's the way he's able to do it. I wish I had that ability. And then Jason Perez, who is another guy who now is the co-host of CTV Morning Live in Vancouver, was another guy who was part of our sports department. And one of the things that he taught me very early on, whether or not he knew it or not at the time, was being adaptable and being able to add different strengths, add different skills to your tool belt. So he was the one when I was at CTV that really had an impact on me as far as writing. He's like, always, you can only improve as a writer. You never settle for being for thinking that you've reached your pinnacle or the height of your writing. Always push yourself to find a new way to say something, a new way to write something, a new way to tell a story. So I think that was really influential for me. He was one of the guys who, along with Vin Nguyen, who's an editor there at CTV, a video editor, they taught me how to edit, video edit, and to master it. So by the time I left in 2014, I was anchoring the weekend 6 o'clock and 11:30 sportscasts, and then filling in throughout the week for different shows, different sportscasts. But by the end on the weekend, I was editing my own highlights, writing the script for my own highlights, writing the on-cast for my own highlights, producing and setting up my entire 6-minute sportscast. And that took a lot of time to master that. Not that I ever really did master it, but the fact that I was able to get it to air on a consistent basis is something that I look back on, and is like one of the achievements for me in my career from a personal growth aspect, which was really cool. Other people who kind of were really helpful to me along the way was Don Taylor and BMAC from TSN Radio and Team 1040 back then, Barry McDonald and Don Taylor. I remember going to a charity event at the Vancouver Canadians game beforehand, where a bunch of the sports personalities got to play a game of softball and look like fools before one of their games. And they pulled me aside afterwards, and they complimented me. And I had never really met them in person before. And the fact that they complimented me, it meant so much. It meant that everything that I was kind of working towards, the style of which I present, which is more straight-laced. I'm not. I'll mix in some humor, if you can even call that, into some of my on cameras and stuff like that with SportsCentre. But I'm more of the straight-laced guy who sometimes can be critical of something, and that's kind of the way that I've always kind of built my on-air personality to be, and that's just more so of a reflection of who I am away from the camera as well. So I'm not usually, if my kid's part of a sports team, most parents have no clue that I'm even working for TSN until it randomly comes up at some point. That I want to. I think I shared this with the BCIT class as well. It's like, as much as I love this job, I don't want this job to be about me. I don't want to have my imprint on a story. I love telling other people's story, and I take great pride in that, but I don't want that story to become a part of me. So I found that what Don and BMAC said to me back then stuck with me all the way to where I am now. And having seen what happened recently with just the layoffs in Bell Media has been really tough. To see so many people, role models, coworkers, colleagues that I looked up to lose their job was really tough. I've reached out to so many of them, and I'm thanking them for everything they've done, just to show just how standard of people they are. They come back thanking me, and I'm like, no, like this is not the form. This is not about me at all. This is about you and the impact those people have had on not only my career, but so many other people, whether it be the listener or coworkers. And it's the last month has been tough for us in the broadcast industry, but the resiliency that those people have shown and the resiliency that we have shown, I think it speaks volumes of just the character and the people they are away behind the microphone, whether it's on the radio or away from the camera, or even the people who work behind the scenes, just the absolute character the producers have, and just the great human beings that they are. And
yeah, if I can, I'll echo those sentiments as well. As Rob Faye, who was doing the nighttime show at 1040, was involved in that. And when he was with the Vancouver Canadians, I was working with the summer collegiate baseball team at the time, and our paths crossed. And at one point, I was at a Canadians game as a media member and doing a story with a couple of interviews, and he came down and personally connected my interviews and made sure I was taken care of and kept in touch going forward. And somebody that's kind of been like a big brother in the business to me personally. So I'll echo those sentiments as well.
Yeah. And it's true. And just to add on about like Rob Faye, the same thing with the Vancouver Canadians experiences I had with them. Nothing but the utmost professionalism that he has shown to not only me but you, but countless others in the industry, and that just says something about so many times when we're in this industry, everyone thinks it's cutthroat, and I have found it to be the complete opposite. I found it that it doesn't matter who you are, the experiences and the people I've met along the way, they only want to help you get better, and you want to, and then in turn help them get better. So that community is awesome. That's all I can say about it. It's absolutely awesome.
Absolutely. So in 2010, you were involved in the production of content for the 2010 Vancouver Olympics. How did that opportunity come about, and kind of what did your role look like?
Oh, my role shifted so many times during that month in 2010. So it started out as I was supposed to just help produce like a 4 or 5 minute sportscast in each of our CTV BC shows, as they were known back then, at 3:30 and 11:30 each night. They were aired nationally, and so they soon found out after day one that people weren't craving the news; they were craving more Olympic coverage. So I went from producing a 5 minute sportscast on day one to day number two, coming in and the senior producer at CTV pulling me aside and was saying, we need to bump up our sports content to about 10 to 15 minutes of these half an hour shows, and we're leading with it. So that involved me finding all mapping out the entire day's worth of events where Canadians had a strong chance of medaling, mapping that out, watching those, writing the highlights for those. At the time, Blake Price, Jason Pires, and Perry Silkowski, and Farhan were our reporters for those sports reporters for that half-hour show. So it was a matter of me finding enough content, 2 or 3 minutes for each of them at their venues to turn around. So most of them didn't have the replay monitors or the review monitors with them at these live sporting events. So I would have to basically map out exactly word for word, timed out perfectly, these scripts that they would then read without actually seeing what they're reading. The only thing they're listening for is like the audio cues in their ear for when they hear the crowd roar, knowing that, let's say it's in curling, that they stuck it on the button, or if it was hockey, they scored a goal and you could hear the crowd. So you're timing it out like that. So being able to do a live sportscast at a venue with no return monitor or review monitor is one of the greatest challenges that you can either like pass with flying colors when you go back and watch it, or realize that you're like 3 seconds off the entire time. So your read of your script is completely off to what the viewer at home is seeing. But so it involved me writing those each day for 2 shows. So it went from me producing maybe 10 minutes of content on the first day to anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes of content on day 2 throughout the rest of the Olympics. And so that was a great opportunity. I basically lived and breathed the Olympics for an entire month. I got home probably at like 2 a.m. in the morning, and then was right back downtown at Robson and Burrard at about 8:30. So I mean, like we just my wife and I, Sarah, had our first kid then in January of 2010. So she moved in with their parents for the month of February, and that's where I would travel to at night, just so she'd be supported that way. But it was a really cool experience, and they'd be able to come down and visit me during the day, so I'd have like a chunk of time off, so I get to see my newborn son and interact with him, and then wake up in the middle of the night and be able to hold him and stuff like that. Well, the few hours that I had with him, but it was pretty cool to have that Olympic experience on top of an entire new life experience of being a dad for the first time and for the first month.
Yeah, absolutely. And another big part of your time in Vancouver was you had a chance, like I said earlier, to cover basically all the major teams in the city. Mm-hmm. You did interviews and content for That's Hockey with the Canucks, sidelines with the Whitecaps and Lions. Has there been any player or coach encounter during that window that you had a particular reaction to, like, oh, that was cool, or maybe was there an interaction that you learned from?
Yeah, there was many interactions that I learned from. There were so many different ones. Getting to deal with the Sedins was a treat. Like, I grew up in Northern Alberta, so my allegiances as a hockey fan back when I was as a hockey fan were with the Oilers. And then once I got into the industry, obviously you can't have a favorite team or root for a team, because that kind of blurs your bias when you're on air. But getting to know the Sedins, and I think that's kind of my main takeaway from so many different things that I've done throughout my career, is getting to know players on a human level, not just the interactions you have as a reporter. So that was those two were pretty standout. Russell Tybert is another one for the Vancouver Whitecaps. We did a show, or part of my sportscast back then was Kelcey versus the Pros, where I challenged a local Vancouver pro athlete at their job, and then they come in and do my job on a weekend sportscast. So getting to trade penalty kicks with him, and then him come in and school me at my own on-air job was a pretty good treat to have. And then John Tortorella is another one. I was there for Torts' reign as a coach of the Vancouver Canucks, and it was one of our camera guys one day when we were there, when the cell phone went off during one of his press conferences, and he went on his little phone call rant and everything like that. So there's those interactions that really stick out and that I remember as well. But then there's just the other opportunities, like when the NBA teams would come each year and play an exhibition game, just getting that different opportunity and that experience back then of getting to talk to players who play a different sport other than the big sports that Vancouver has. Getting to interview David Beckham when he was with the LA Galaxy, getting to play against the Whitecaps was another cool one for me during my time in Vancouver.
And did you, while you were in Vancouver, did you get to cover Alfonso Davies at all?
Yeah, I got to cover the early days of Alfonso Davies, which was awesome to see where he is now, that he's winning every single major soccer trophy imaginable. A kid from a refugee camp from Ghana who lived in Edmonton, who then went on to Vancouver and now is playing for one of the biggest clubs in the world. Is great to see. I got to cover him there, and then when I came here to TSN and started working with TSN Soccer and MLS on TSN, getting to go to different all-star games and getting to interview players one-on-one on their media days, and having a chance to connect with Alfonso Davies again when he was a member of the Whitecaps at an all-star, his final all-star game before he eventually signed on to go to play for Bayern Munich, was an amazing experience to be able to have that. And my big story with Alfonso was we were in Atlanta, was where he played, and they were playing against Juventus, and the MLS All-Stars stayed at the same hotel that the media and the whole MLS operation stayed at. And I was playing PlayStation 4 at the time, and I look up and there's Alfonso standing next to me. I'm like, you can do this. And the battery died immediately. So then I was hunting all around the motel or the hotel to find a battery cable or a charging cable for him so he could play with him and his buddies. So Alfonso's a great kid. He was a great kid from the first time I met him as a 15-year-old with the Whitecaps, and now as a 20-year-old. It's only been 5 years, but that rise has been astronomical, and he's earned every single second of his glory thus far playing for Bayern Munich.
Fantastic, and it's been fun to watch from a distance. We'll take a break, and we'll be back for segment number 3 here on Behind the Mic on ASTV with TSN's Kelcey Brade. And welcome back to Behind the Mic on ASTV, on ASTVProductions.com, and on YouTube. Jonathan Hodgson back for one more segment with TSN's Kelcey Brade. Kelcey, once again, thanks so much for doing this with us. This has been an absolute blast, and we're very thankful that you would pick up the proverbial phone for us.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I know this hour's flying by even for me, so it's great to chat.
Well, like you and I were talking about off camera, it's a unique challenge as an interviewer when talking to all sportscasters, because with athletes, you get a range of people that you talk to, from those who don't want to talk to those that will talk if your questions are up to it.
Yep.
But talking to all sportscasters, everybody I talk to knows how to talk.
We don't shut up. we're all about the long form communication, as opposed to the 10 to 15 second sound bites that athletes give you.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. Well, in segment number 2, we got into talking about soccer and a little bit about Alfonso Davies, and one more on Alfonso that I didn't get in that last block was when you guys saw him in Vancouver at a really young age. Was there already a sense when you were watching him live that he was going to be something?
Yeah, I don't know if it was to the extremes where he's gone now, but you knew then, just with his vision at the age of 15, his ability to create something out of absolutely nothing, whether it be with his speed, you knew he was bound for stardom. I think at the times, just based on the overall picture of Canadian soccer back then, especially from the men's perspective, is like, no, this guy's going to be a rock star MLS player. Like he's going to be, maybe he's going to help this national team get to new places. That was in the first 2 years, and then once you saw what he was doing as a 17 going to 18-year-old, you're just like, this kid is unbelievable. The sky is the limit for him. And you look at what he's done now with Bayern Munich. You look at what he's doing from the national team perspective, and the inspiration he's serving to just all the youth players from across this country. Those, whether boy or girl, are coming up just like the same way that the girl soccer players look up to Christine Sinclair, and even boy soccer players. Like my oldest son was a massive fan of Christine Sinclair for the longest time, just because she was the star of Canadian soccer. And now to have Alfonso there, to have Jonathan David there, and the list continues to grow of great Canadian soccer talent that is emerging from this country on both the men's and women's side, that great things can only come. I know for the women's team, they're going through a bit of a transition right now, or they will go through a bit of transition once Christine Sinclair hangs up the boots. But until she does, that team is going to be competitive. And the men's team, I mean, we're going to host the 2026 World Cup, Canada, Mexico, and United States, but there is that outside shot and somewhat of a realistic shot that they could make the 2022 World Cup. So I think that's a lot of that excitement has to do because of Alfonso Davies and Jonathan David.
And you said in the second segment that once you start covering sports as a job, the fandom has to go away, or at least take a back seat. But I'll use that to lead into the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Is after you made the move to Toronto to become part of the SportsCentre crew, you've also hosted MLS on TSN. Like you've alluded to, for a soccer fan, how much fun has that been, and how proud are you to have been a part of that coverage?
It's been an absolute blast. Ever since I got to be able to sit on the host or the anchor desk with Christian Jack or Terry Dunfield or Stephen Caldwell or any other of my analysts that have come and gone, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned so much from people like Terry Dunfield, who is a former Vancouver Whitecap, former Canadian international player. He left Canada at a younger age to pursue his dream of playing soccer overseas in England. He was part of the Manchester City Academy. The amount of knowledge that Christian Jack has been able to share with me and just be able to learn from him, like a consummate on-air professional, has I can't even begin, again, like I said earlier, quantify so many of these different interactions or mentors or colleagues like that. He's had a huge impact on my broadcasting career. But from a player perspective, the fact that in Vancouver you were kind of limited to just covering the Vancouver angle of it. At TSN, you still put a bigger focus on the 3 Canadian teams, but being able to interview Thierry Henry and him not liking your question and hanging up on you or close to hanging up on you on a teleconference call last year is one of the funnier, awkward highlights. Being able to, at the All-Star game in 2017 in Chicago, we were supposed to interview 3 TFC players after the All-Star game, but they apparently all left at halftime on the Larry Tannenbaum's private jet or something to that extent. So they said, how about you talk to Bastian Schweinsteiger? And my family is German, so we've been German soccer fans for the longest time because we watched them play in all the international tournaments. And Bastian Schweinsteiger, one of the greats for Bayern Munich. And for me to be waiting there and him come up and tap me on the shoulder, and I turn around and he's like, "Hi, I'm Bastian." I'm like, "You don't need to introduce yourself to me, man. Like, I know who you are. I need to introduce myself to you." So players like that, Greg Popovich from the San Antonio Spurs, being able to ask him a question and for him not to give one of his short, curt answers was another highlight for me. Being able to see Connor McDavid's last game as a junior hockey player with the Erie Otters and be able to follow his final few games at the junior level before he went to the NHL was kind of neat. And his interviewing has his personality has evolved since then compared to back then. I think that's where you're referring to when you're talking to junior hockey athletes or any junior athlete and you get the 10 or 15 second soundbite if you're lucky and if the question is right and if they're not nervous. So it's been great to be able to interact with so many different broadcasters in the soccer world, players, soccer stars, and also even from across a wide range of different sports. It's been really cool to have those interactions and those opportunities to pick their minds, because that's ultimately what I'm doing. I'm doing it for the fan, but also a little bit doing it because I want to learn more about them and what makes them tick.
And you bring up an interesting point when you kind of had fun bringing up that Thierry Henry story of talking about a question that may not have gone over so well.
Yeah.
And for aspiring sportscasters, sometimes maybe the goal might be to avoid that. Okay, how do I not do that? But once you've been in this for a while, I think you realize that those are going to happen. Yep. You're gonna do everything you can to prep, but sometimes stuff just happens. So when something like that does happen, when something doesn't unfold like you thought, when you get a frosty reception in an interview, whatever it is, how do you approach that, and how do you move on from an experience like that?
I think it's definitely changed over the years. I think early on I would have taken it a lot more personally. Now I usually not laugh off the situation and it's like, haha, I was an idiot, or he was an idiot. But I think that's just my way of dealing with it in the immediacy, is laughing it off. And then I'll go back, overthink it, overanalyze it 1,000 times, try and figure out if it was a word or two that I could have improved on to maybe convey my question a little bit better, or depending if he was already short in answering other people's questions, or I kind of hit a hot topic or issue that he didn't want to touch on. So I think over time it's definitely changed, but like you had mentioned, those questions are going to happen. Like they happen even I've been doing this since 2004 is when I first started doing Spartan Web Radio, and it's 2021. And I ask dumb questions all the time. I ask close-ended questions sometimes. I ask questions that they correct me on as soon as I ask it. They're like, that's a good question, but what I think you mean or what you're asking is this. So that still happens to this day. So for me, it's always been not taking myself too seriously or too hard on myself, not beating myself up. And I think that's the biggest thing. You got to have a bit of a thick skin, but at the same time, how you just deal with it in like immediately afterwards and compartmentalize it. Remember, maybe don't ask it in that certain way next time, or if that question ever arises in a different setting. So I think that's probably the way I've kind of dealt with that angle of asking an awful question, which is what I still do. I'll never escape that.
Yeah, no, nobody's immune from that.
No.
I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit of SportsCentre with you. I'm sure our viewers want to hear a little bit about that, and something that I've had the opportunity to ask you about before, but I think has some value to our viewers, is the fact that your process in getting to Toronto and joining the SportsCentre team took a couple of attempts, a couple of tries. Walk us through what that process was like of trying out and not getting it the first time around, and kind of how you recalibrated things for your second go around.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing. It doesn't matter what you do in life. I don't think anyone is batting 1,000%. Like if you're gonna relate to a baseball term, like a baseball term or phrase, like no one has gotten absolutely everything that they set their heart out on the very first attempt. And for me, that was trying to get to SportsCentre. That was my goal when I before I even got into broadcasting. My goal was to make it to SportsCentre. And my first go round, it would have been right after Jay and Dan left for Fox Sports FS1 down in the States. There was an opening, obvious openings there with TSN. They were also expanding from the two feeds, TSN 1 and 2, now to what is TSN 5. So they were expanding the amount of sports centers that they were going to be doing nightly and on weekends. So I think there was that opportunity there. I had worked extremely hard, always putting together demos and stuff like that of the work that I did with CTV in the time that I was there. So I got in touch with TSN. There was almost radio silence for like 3 months after I sent in my initial demo tape and application or my resume. And then I got a random call one day and they said, hey, would you be interested in coming out to Toronto for an audition and interview? And I came out there in what would have been 2013. I want to say July or August 2013. Did my audition, did my interview. They try and trip you up during your audition. At the very end, they'll be playing a tape and they'll say, oh, the tape's frozen, we're coming back to you on camera. You got to fill for 45 seconds or a minute. And I was able to fill. And afterwards, one of the supervising producers was like, that was one of the best fills we've ever seen. I'm like, well, how did it all go? And all they kept on saying is that it went well. And I'm like, well, it can be taken so many different ways. So I left there having felt great about the interview, about my audition, and came back home, was in a bit of communication with them for like a month or two. And then basically the radio silence returned again. And it wasn't until July 2014 that I got the call out of the blue, and all it was an email that said, hey, can you call me? And it was from one of the VPs at TSN, and it was out of the blue. So I phoned him and he's like, hey, you had a great interview, great audition, blah, blah, blah. We'd like to offer you a position here at TSN. I'm like, it was almost 11 months ago. Like where was not where was this 11 months ago, but where was this like letting me down softly 11 months ago? Like, hey, you're not the fit for these hires or for the hires we're doing right now, or maybe work on this or work on that. It was just like no feedback or constructive feedback. So during that span of would have been, I guess, September 2013 to July 2014, I buckled down even more in my preparation for my sportscast, pushing myself. And it's quite relatable to how it is now that we're in COVID, and just how much this industry has changed so much in the last year, that if you want to continue doing what we were doing in March or February of 2020, then good luck to you, because this industry is going to leave you behind if you're not willing to adapt. And we've seen every single person in this industry adapt to the best way that they possibly can to still bring a desirable product to air, whether you're in a small market or in a big market or a national market like us. So I think during that time, I'm sorry for getting off track, but from September 2013 to July 2014, there was a great deal of change that I went through, growth-wise, from an on-air perspective, behind the scenes from a writing perspective. Like, I really had to sharpen those up, that if that next opportunity came that I got to go to Toronto to do another edition, to make it on the SportsCentre or another interview, I'd be ready to go. Thankfully, I didn't need that. I was hired in a year later, and not the rest is history, but the last 6+ years have been a blast here at TSN.
You mentioned the changes that the business has been forced to go through this last year. How has COVID changed a typical workday at SportsCentre, and how has it changed a typical taping?
Yeah, it's changed it quite a bit. Before, we used to do SportsCentres at 10, 11, and then Jay's show at midnight, and then 1 a.m. taping. So we used to do all those shows used to be done live, whereas now, so that would involve 4 different anchor pairs, so 8 different anchors on a given night. That's basically being cut in half just from the physical distancing that has to go on at the station. Like, I don't think any newsroom in North America or the country was set up for everyone to have to be separated by 6 feet or more in plexiglass and hand sanitizer at every possible turn and wearing masks everywhere. But it has changed how we kind of do things. So much of it is done from home now. This is my home set. So for the last couple of days, I've been assigned to what we call the multi-platform shift for SportsCentre. So any breaking news that happens between 10 a.m. and about 12:30, 1 p.m., I'm in charge of hosting. So if something arises, then I fire up my iPhone, which has this program called the Gero on it. I have my other iPhone that has the IFB IFB capabilities that I can patch into the control room at SportsCentre, and I host interview. All right, I'll do interviews. If need to go live, I could go live from this setting. I've got a big TV light right above my head, so that's why the lighting's not awful. So we've been set up for last year like this to be able to react to different stories as they happen, because it just doesn't make sense to have me in that building on a day where nothing happens, sitting for 6 hours with a pandemic raging on. But even from if I do go into the station, the show, the way that it's set up is a lot different now as well. Before, you'd usually show up anywhere between, I'd say, 4 to 5 hours before your show. But now, just because of the timing, they don't want anchors overlapping, because you're kind of like in a cohort in a roundabout way, just to keep everyone, as far as COVID protocols and tracing and stuff like that, to keep that simpler for our bosses and for everyone else's safety. We go in anywhere from 3 to 4 hours now, and you go in, go through makeup, get to your desk, look at your show lineup. We have writers that are at the station. We have writers who are at home now, who are watching the games on their computer screen being fed to them from the station. They're writing their highlights. Editors, the video editors, are at home as well. They're watching the same game, talking to the story writer, and they're editing it and putting it on our server and on our network, and it feeds back to the station, and they're able to play it out on air. So I mean, the jumps to make live television happen in the last year is incredible, and I can only see it improving in the future. And that means there will be different little challenges that come along the way, but it's another opportunity for everyone who gets to do this for a living to be able to adapt and push themselves to new limits. As
we start to wind down our interview with Kelcey, just have a few more quick ones, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Once again, thanks so much. You've run us through most of what you've been able to accomplish to this point. And you mentioned that SportsCentre was one of your goals from the outset, and now you've been there for a little bit, and you've covered a lot of really, really important, really cool things. So how do you recalibrate your career goals now that you've accomplished maybe the biggest one from the outset?
Yeah, and that took me a little while to kind of figure out what the next goals that I was going to try and set for myself professionally would be. And one of those is I want to get back into play-by-play. I did a lot of that, as I mentioned, at the university level. It's something that I still believe I have the passion for, and I want to give it another kick at the can. I'm not sure if I'll be as sharp-witted and be able to have the game flow off the tip of my tongue like I was that many years ago, but it's definitely something I want to try again. Another thing would be being able to cover one of the World Cups. If Canada were to make it in 2022, the Men's World Cup, then that's something that I'd love the opportunity to go over and cover. And then in 2026, when Canada, Mexico, and the United States host the World Cup, that is something I'd love to be involved in, whether it's from a broadcasting perspective, working for TSN, or if it's eventually moving to a different part of my career where it's not on air, but being able to still be involved with soccer. I think that's kind of where my focus is and where my goals that I've slowly started to, as you mentioned, recalibrate and set for myself. And in the next couple of years, I think that's kind of where my passion or my career passions is for sports is kind of taking me right now.
So what's a perspective or a piece of wisdom that you have now that you've learned through your career that you know, I don't know how to phrase this, but maybe that you wish you would have known at the outset, or that would have helped you earlier on? You know, something that you would have told younger you?
Yeah, and that is a great question, because when you are going through the educational aspect of this and the practicum aspect of this, there's always people leading you, like from a professor or a teacher or an instructor perspective. When you get into this industry, like I've spoken about the great relationships I've been able to build, the mentors who I've kind of looked up to in this industry as well. But the younger self, I would push myself to make those mentor relationships a little earlier on. And also being able to, when you get into a new situation, to completely throw yourself into it and not wait for them to come, for it to come to you. You have to go get it. As much as, like I've said, the insight, the time spent by other people helping me throughout my career, I think I waited too long to ask or to reach out or to try and make those connections. And I think that's something that I would tell my younger self and anyone else who's coming into this industry, is try and connect with those people earlier on. When I did connect with those people back then, they were always more than willing to help out. And I see that now, and that's an area where, for how long I've been doing this now, anytime like yourself asking if there was any interest for me to come on your show, 100% yes, because these are the little things that I wish I did better, like what you're doing right now with this show, that I think I would have been able to make a little bit more advances earlier on in my career, or at least build the confidence a little bit earlier on in my career. So I think that's where shows like yours, podcasts, anytime that I can come on and share what I've learned, my failures, successes, and whatnot, I think that's always going to be helping out the next generation of broadcasters, which I think is important. And eventually, we always joked in the industry, is like, we're helping you out. One day you're probably going to take our job, but we're okay with that. That's totally fine. So we welcome that. And I think it was BMAC who said the same thing to me all those years ago. Like, he's like, just don't get too good so that you take my job. And so like, it's always those little things that we're happy to help out. And as much as I said, like, so much of this industry, like when it's in movies or shows, makes it look cutthroat. It's the complete opposite. My experience so far in my years in broadcasting has been the complete opposite of that.
And last one for you. When you talk about the crazy hours that you oftentimes have to pull, especially when you're starting out, the changes, the disappointments, everything that comes with a life in this business, what is the main thing that keeps Kelcey Brade grounded through everything?
Oh, my family, 100%. My wife and my wife and kids, being able to take them to sporting event, like to their sporting events, whether it's hockey practice, hockey games. It's definitely them. And being able, they love sports, but at the same time, they're not a sports nut like I am. So coming home and having no sports on the TV for a night is like a great relief. And then it's good to have a passion, a greater passion than my career, which is obviously my family, a greater passion than my career. But it's great to have them to come home to and be able to just put all the the workday stuff away and be able to just hang out.
Kelcey, thanks again. This has been an absolute blast to do a little shop talk and walk through a lot of your career. I know I've learned a lot, had a blast on the way through, and I'm sure our viewers have enjoyed it and learned something as well. And I'll just echo what you were just talking about a moment ago about people that might be in higher places than I am right now. I mean, I've lived that. I mean, you're the latest in a long line of people who've been that to me. And we talk about, we mentioned Rob Faye earlier, and if our viewers go back and look at my guest list on my YouTube playlist, or go to my Twitter page, and you'll see the Peter Labardius, Rod Peterson, Jamie Thomas, Jerry Howarth. I mean, just some unbelievable people that part of me doesn't feel like I should be on the same screen as them.
No, but you should be. That's the thing. That's what people always mistake. That's how I felt when I was in your shoes. But you 100% should be, because that's the thing. At the end of the day, we're taught to be able to pretend. Well, not pretend. We're taught to almost have it. Sure, we're looking at a camera hosting this show right now, but we're essentially just two guys at a bar having a conversation. And the guy sitting next to you at the bar is no better than the guy sitting on the other side of you at the bar. We're all just there. We love sports, or we love broadcasting. And if that's what our commonality and what kind of brings you together to a conversation, that should be it. You should never look at it that this person's up here or that person's down there. We're all equals sitting at the same bar at the same bar.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Kelcey.
Thank you, Jonathan.
We'll be back on the other side of one more break with our wrap up. But once again, thanks, Kelcey, for coming on to visit with us. We'll be back to wrap it up here on Behind the Mic on ASTV. And once again, welcome back to Behind the Mic on Amateur Sport, or on ASTVProductions.com, on ASTVProductions.com, and our YouTube page. Thanks so much for watching us once again. A great time with TSN's Kelcey Brade, walking through his career from school at BCIT and Trinity Western to his beginnings in the Vancouver market, covering the Canucks, the Whitecaps, the Lions, some of the people who have been important to him along the way, and some of his wisdom that he passes on to the next wave of up-and-coming sportscasters. So once again, thanks so much for him coming on. If you missed any part of the show or you want to go back and watch our previous episodes, you can find the Behind the Mic archived playlist on YouTube with every episode featuring tonight's show with Kelcey, along with other episodes like Jerry Howarth, Peter Labardius, Rod Peterson, Jamie Thomas, and more. You can find those on our website and our YouTube. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern, on the website and YouTube with another chat with another outstanding sportscaster. And I'm very excited about our next couple of weeks of shows, just about to be finalized. And we will have those guest reveals for you on the ASTV Twitter account, as well as my own Twitter account. If you choose to follow me at Haji Speaks, is where we have our prep and our post game from all of our interviews. So one more time, thanks so much for watching. Thanks to Kelcey Brade for sharing an hour with us. We hope you enjoyed. And I'm Jonathan Hodgson, and we'll catch up with you again next Friday.